Hundreds of skulls stacked in circles under a Mexico City building. In Naples, a vial of dried blood still miraculously turns to liquid 3 times a year. Doesn't though, locals believe disaster is coming, and across Europe, churches claim to hold the Holy Foreskin of Jesus. One was paraded through the streets for hundreds of years until it vanished without a trace. These are terrifying, forgotten religious artifacts. Starting in February 2015, archaeologists Raul Barrera and his team were excavating under a colonial-era building in downtown Mexico City, not far from the Templo Mayor complex. They dug until they hit the basalt floor of the Aztec period, and then hundreds of skull fragments started showing up. They had found the main skull rack of Tenochtitlan. This was the legendary structure Spanish conquistadors had written about, estimating it held 130,000 something skulls. And for hundreds of years, historians wondered, did it really exist? Or did the Spanish just make it up? Were they exaggerating things to make the Aztecs look more barbaric? The wooden poles that once held the skulls had rotted away, but the post holes were still there. Nearby, they found something even stranger. Skulls mortared together in circles, all facing inward toward an empty space in the center. To this day, nobody knows what was supposed to go there. The platform was partly excavated under the floor of a 3-story house. Because the building was historically valuable, archaeologists had to work in these narrow excavation wells about 6 feet below the floor, laying on their stomachs on wooden platforms. Sounds fun. By 2020, they'd found over 600 skulls in the tower structure, skulls of men, women, and children, which was surprising for some of the researchers who were only expecting to find male warriors. Eduardo Matos explained the whole point was psychological warfare. Aztecs would invite friends and, more importantly, enemies into the city. They'd make sure to show them this rack of decomposing heads. Certainly one way to keep people from messing with you. In Naples Cathedral, there's a relic supposedly containing the dried blood of Saint Januarius, a bishop who was martyred around 305 CE. The blood sits in 2 glass vials inside a silver shrine. 3 times a year, massive crowds pack into the cathedral to watch if it'll liquefy. The dates are specific: the Saturday before the first Sunday in May, September 19th, and December 16th. The first documented time anyone wrote about it liquefying was back in 1389. On September 19th, 2024, Archbishop Domenico Battaglia held up the vial and declared it had turned to liquid again, saying, quote, "Every drop of this blood speaks to us of the love of God." When it doesn't liquefy, though, some see it as a bad omen. War, plague, disaster. Something bad is coming. Vials normally sit locked in a vault and only get brought out for these ceremonies. Whether you think it's a miracle or not, thousands of people show up every time, and the attention in that cathedral must be insane. In March 2016, archaeologists working south of Athens dug up a mass grave with about 80 male skeletons. Some of them still had iron shackles locked tight around their wrists. They died in the second half of the 7th century BCE, during this time of brutal political chaos in Athens. These were executions, not battle deaths, and the skeletons were grouped together like they'd been killed at the same time. The project director said this was the first time they could physically see the violent power struggles that eventually led to democracy in Athens. These guys were probably part of a failed political or religious faction that got wiped out. The Greek Ministry of Culture is building a permanent exhibition for the site, set to open in 2026. They'll be able to walk through and see the actual remains, a physical reminder that democracy was born out of some very brutal violence. Multiple churches across Europe claim to have the Holy Prepuce, literally the foreskin of Jesus Christ. The most famous one was in this small village called Calcutta, just north of Rome. The story goes that after the sack of Rome in 1527, a German soldier stole the relic and it somehow ended up there. Every January 1st, on the Feast of the Circumcision, they'd parade it through the streets, till 1983, when it just vanished. Father Don Dario Magnoni announced the relic had been stolen from his home. At the peak of the relic craze, though, there were supposedly 18 different holy foreskins floating around Europe. The Catholic Church even offered perks if you visited the one in Calcutta, up to 10 years worth of reduced time in purgatory, just for showing up to see it. Can't get in on that deal now because nobody has any idea where it went. Between the 6th and 8th centuries CE in ancient Mesopotamia, people were burying clay bowls upside down beneath their houses. Why? Well, they were demon traps. The bowls are covered in spiral inscriptions. The text starts in the center and winds outward. You could buy them in markets. Regular families would try to keep demons away from their kids or their livestock, and they'd bury them under their floors. Some of them have the homeowner's name written directly into the curse. They've also found ones with a drawing of a bound demon scratched into the clay with lines of text spiraling around it to kind of lock it in place. Hundreds of these bowls have been found across Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Scholars like Matthew Morgenstern have spent years translating them, finding curses against rival sorcerers, charms against disease, protections against Liliths, female demons that attacked newborns in the night. What gets under your skin, though, isn't the drawings or the curses. It's putting yourself in these people's shoes. They genuinely believed that without these bowls under their floors, ghastly demons were going to crawl out and come for them and their family in the night. That's along with all the living you have to worry about, too. That makes for a pretty stressful day-to-day existence, I think. On May 6, 1950, two brothers named Viggo and Emil Højgaard were cutting peat for fuel in a bog just west of Silkeborg, Denmark. They were working about 2.5 meters below the surface when they found what looked like a fresh corpse. Actually, the body was so well preserved, they thought they'd found someone who was recently killed, so they called the cops. When police arrived and learned the body was found deep in the peat, though, they realized this was something for archaeologists to handle. The man had actually been dead for over 2,300 years. The acidic, low-oxygen peat had basically mummified him. His skin had turned this leathery brown color, almost black. His hair was still there. You could see stubble on his face, but he'd been dead hundreds of years before Jesus was born. Around his neck was a braided leather noose, and his tongue was distended. This had not been a violent struggle. It was ritualistic. 2021, researchers were even able to figure out what his last meal was. It was porridge, 85% barley, and then flax and other seeds. Archaeologists believe he was likely sacrificed to the fertility goddess Nerthus, who received offerings in wetlands. The variety of seeds in his gut, many of them weeds that wouldn't usually be eaten, could mean this was kind of a special sacrificial meal. Only his head is actually real now. Back in the 50s, they just didn't have the technology to preserve an entire body like that, so the examiners decided to just keep his head and leave the rest. But in 1987, the Silkeborg Museum rebuilt the body using what was left of the bones. In December 1945, two Egyptian farmers named Muhammad and Khalifa Ali were digging for fertilizer near a cliff when they found a sealed clay jar. Muhammad was scared to break it at first, thought a jinn might be inside, but then wondered if there might be gold. He smashed the jar, but instead of gold or a demon, papyrus went flying everywhere. Inside were 12 leather-bound papyrus texts. Turned out these were alternative versions of early Christianity that the church had spent hundreds of years trying to erase. The Gospel of Thomas is full of Jesus speaking in these weird cryptic sayings. The Gospel of Philip talks about hidden spiritual knowledge being more important than faith. The codices had probably been buried by monks from a nearby monastery after non-canonical books had been condemned in 367 CE. So getting caught with these things could have gotten you executed. Manuscripts were brought together in Cairo, where scholars worked for years to translate them. The full collection wasn't published until the 70s and 80s. When archaeologists finally got their hands on these texts, they realized early Christianity wasn't this unified thing. It was a whole mess of competing ideas, and some of those ideas got buried for almost 1,600 years. In 2006, researchers at a university in Frankfurt were cataloging a private collection when they found a small gold scroll wrapped inside a lead capsule. It looked like jewelry at first, but once they carefully unrolled it, they realized it was a curse. Cursed jewelry. The text was written in Greek and dated to the 2nd or 3rd century CE, probably from Roman Egypt. The handwriting was tiny and full of spelling mistakes, probably by someone who wasn't fully literate, but at least they knew the formula for summoning spirits. That's more than I can say. The scroll listed the names of deities and invoked them to bind someone. The amulet's owner had carried someone's curse around their neck, right next to their skin. The same kind of scrolls have been found in graves and wells, but this one, being wearable, meant whoever made it wanted that dark energy close to them at all times. In 2019, a team from Associates for Biblical Research re-examined leftover dirt from an old Israeli excavation on Mount Ebal. The site, described in the Bible as the Mountain of Curses, found a small folded lead tablet. It was sealed shut, too brittle to pry open, so in 2021 they scanned it with micro-CT imaging. On the inside was an inscription that read, cursed, 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 cursed by the god Yahweh, believed to date somewhere between 1200 and 1400 BCE, which would make it one of the oldest known Hebrew texts ever found. In 1933, French archaeologist Robert Dumesnil du Buisson was excavating the ancient Assyrian city of Arslan Tash in northern Syria when he purchased 2 limestone plaques from a peasant, covered in tiny Phoenician script. When the writing was translated, it turned out these things were meant to keep demons out of the home. The text calls on multiple gods and explicitly mentions banishing the Lilu and Lilith, again demonic beings that preyed on humans, especially children, at night. Scholars dated them to around the 7th century BCE. Syrian houses were full of small charms and rituals meant to ward off evil like this, but these amulets stood out because of how vivid the language was. I mean, it reads like someone genuinely terrified of what might crawl through the door after dark. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.